Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and now that the superhero embargo has been lifted, I'm going to say something that may make some of you question my sanity at first. You see, I like Frank Miller's The Spirit.
Yes, I am talking about that infamous movie from 2008, the one so many have declared a travesty, the one which is the subject of so many internet videos devoted to its evisceration. I like it. I know I'm not the only person who does like it, but I'm about to become one of the few who will publicly declare that sentiment. And yes, I do have reasons that don't boil down to so bad it's good.
Now, to be clear, I am aware that this is not the most faithful adaptation of Will Eisner's source material, and if you want an updated version of The Spirit that sticks closer to that vision, you need look no further than when Darwin Cook updated the character when it was still at DC. Definitely worth the read, by the way. Still, even with that in mind, I enjoyed this infamous movie. And frankly, I suspect that some of the ire towards it doesn't have anything to do with the movie's quality. But I'll address that when the time is right.
So, for those who came in late, what is Frank Miller's Will Eisner's The Spirit by Frank Miller about? Well, it's about the Spirit, the daring superhero who protects Central City from the nefarious crime lord known only as the Octopus. The Spirit, of course, was once police officer Denny Colt, who was believed dead after a shootout, but who is inexplicably alive and unable to die. As this adventure begins, the Octopus is after a particular case that has just arrived from out of town, but he runs afoul of Master Cat Burglar Sans Serif, who has her eyes on a different but identical case in the same shipment. Unfortunately for them, the two criminals wind up with each other's quarry, and are willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want. The Spirit is caught in the middle, but this caper comes with personal baggage, as Sans Serif was Denny Colt's childhood sweetheart, and he may still have some residual feelings for her. Not only that, but he may finally learn the whole truth about his origins in the process.
The best shorthand description I can give you of Frank Miller's The Spirit is to say it's like if the 1966 Batman was mashed together with the 1989 Batman.
It's visually stylistic, deliberately campy, and only takes itself seriously insofar as not mocking its own concept. It's the kind of film that has a running gag about the villain being oddly obsessed with eggs.
Except maybe eggs. I had you beat like an egg. No egg on my face! Eggs. Free-range chickens with their big, brown, ugly-ass eggs.
Yet never questions the effectiveness of a domino mask as a means of concealing the hero's identity. It does not shy away from going to dark places, nor does it shy away from being outright ridiculous on multiple occasions. The Spirit regularly breaks the fourth wall, but always takes the situations he finds himself in seriously. The performances are exaggerated, yet they are sincere, and not a single one is phoned in. It stays mostly grounded in the neo-noir genre, yet liberally adds splashes of high fantasy that are integral to the plot.
In short, it's a comic book. It has all those elements that make superhero comics what they are, so you could say it's one of the most literal adaptations of the medium to film you can find, perhaps surpassed only by 300 and Sin City, which are also connected to Frank Miller, interestingly enough.
Slather that in a diesel punk visual style, and it makes for a fascinating film. So why does it have such a bad reputation?
Well, for my own part, I suspect that most of the people who hate this movie don't actually hate this movie. I think what they really hate is Frank Miller.
Despite being one of the revolutionaries who helped change the American comic book industry in the 80s, Frank Miller's reputation was in the midst of a steady downward trajectory in 2008. Part of this can be attributed to his penning of the infamously bad, cumbersomely titled All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder. But if you want to know the origin point, you need look no further than the September 11 terror attacks of 2001.
That was, to put it mildly, a day that shook the entire American nation. And Frank Miller took it especially hard.
Look through interviews he gave in the months following the attack, and you see the words of a man who is very angry and critical of Islam, oftentimes in ways that sound incredibly racist towards the Middle East as a whole.
I'm not here to defend or refute anything he said, mind you. I just think it should be pointed out that after 9/11, something clearly broke inside of Frank Miller.
He was hardly alone in that regard, of course, but nobody else with a public platform was about to join him in his condemnation of the entire Muslim faith. So instead, they went in the opposite direction and began attacking Frank as a person, even going so far as to outright slander him.
You may have heard it said that Frank Miller can only write female characters if they are prostitutes. That's a true statement as long as you ignore all the female characters he wrote who are not prostitutes. Heck, this movie actually disproves that statement.
Frank Miller wrote The Spirit in addition to directing it, and there isn't a single prostitute among the female characters. Sure, they are all attractive, and some of them know how to use their looks to their advantage, but that's hardly the same as being a prostitute.
In fact, isn't a woman being in control of her sexuality considered a form of female empowerment? Or have things shifted now where any attractive woman is automatically considered a prostitute? I honestly wouldn't be surprised.
Anyway, Frank Miller's reputation was well soiled by this point, and that's a crying shame. Here was a man who needed sympathy to get him through a dark time, but what he got instead was hatred, thus making his work something to be avoided. So when Miller went ahead and made his own movie, he didn't have many people in his corner, and most people with platforms were not about to speak well of either him or his work. If you have preconceived notions about the artist, they will color your feelings for the art he produces. And while I can't prove that happened to The Spirit, I still believe it was a factor.
Of course, another potential reason The Spirit has a bad rap is due to something beyond its control. Like I said, the movie was released in 2008, specifically at the end of 2008, after another DC-produced movie about a vigilante clad in black with a single-minded goal of protecting a city.
Yes, 2008 was the year of The Dark Knight, without question. It was a phenomenon, and more importantly, it was declared the pinnacle of what a superhero movie should be. Without question, this is what the people wanted. A dark, gritty, realistic take on classic characters with intricate plots and heavy themes.
In light of that, you could say The Spirit was doomed to fail because it's The Dark Knight's polar opposite.
While The Dark Knight is serious, The Spirit is silly. While The Dark Knight is realistic, The Spirit is very stylized. While The Dark Knight is complex, The Spirit is straightforward. While The Dark Knight wants to make you think, The Spirit is content to let you switch your brain off. In short, The Spirit was the antithesis of what audiences wanted back then. Or perhaps I should say what audiences thought they wanted, since a mere 6 years later, Guardians of the Galaxy would succeed by being, well, the exact opposite of The Dark Knight. So was The Spirit actually ahead of the curve? Maybe that's going a little too far, but I do wonder if it might have stood a better chance had it been released a few years later.
This is all a roundabout way of saying that I don't think The Spirit was given a fair shot, and I do think it can be boiled down to its release in the wake of a trendsetter and the steady character assassination of its maker. I mean, it can't be the obscurity of the character, because for someone who doesn't have a permanent residency at either DC or Marvel, The Spirit is fairly popular. I really do think it has to do with these two elements.
These days, of course, the tides have shifted to a point where super serious, dark and gritty comic book movies are shunned, while over-the-top, lighter comic book movies are praised. Perhaps that could help this movie's reputation.
You know, I've gotten this far, and I can't help but feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh right, there's a character missing from this film.
In Will Eisner's original comics, The Spirit had a sidekick named Ebony White, who is one of the more controversial figures in the medium. On the one hand, well, just look at him. Having originated in the 1940s, Ebony was portrayed as a black stereotype of the worst variety. Yet on the other hand, his partnership with the Spirit is one of the earliest examples of a biracial crime-fighting duo in comics, preceded only by Mandrake the Magician and Lothar, though they originated in newspaper strips.
Anyway, Ebony White has always presented a challenge to people tasked with updating the Spirit. Frank Miller simply chose not to include him because he preferred the idea of the Spirit as a solo vigilante.
It certainly did save him a lot of controversy. As mentioned, he had enough of that in 2008, and ultimately I can't say the movie suffers from Ebony White's absence. I'm sure he could have been updated somehow, and I've seen him updated quite successfully in other adaptations, but if Batman can exist without a sidekick, I see no reason why the Spirit can't do the same.
Speaking of major changes, there's also the fact that we see the villain's face.
In the comics, the octopus's face has yet to be revealed, thus keeping him a mysterious puppet master always lurking just beyond the spirit's ability to catch him. In the movies, however, his face is shown quite clearly, which is kind of unavoidable given how this is a far more active take on the character, plus he's being played by an actor whose face is well known anyway, so that alone kind of kills the mystique. Even so, this version of the octopus still proves to be a memorable villain, and there are a few sly nods to how his face was always obscured in the comics, so I don't see why this should be that big of a deal.
I mean, it's not like Iron Man 2 where they took two different characters and mashed them together figuring no one would care. Which, to be fair, no one did.
Then we have the choice to keep Ellen Dolan, the spirit's primary love interest, oblivious to his secret identity, in contrast to the source material where she is in on the gag.
I'm not gonna lie, that's a change I would not have made.
It feels kind of underhanded and needlessly conspiratorial to keep Ellen in the dark like that, especially given her obvious frustration with how the spirit flirts with every girl around him while still insisting he loves her and her alone. Then again, she's also a skilled medical doctor, so it's not like she's just a clueless girlfriend.
Well, I never said the movie was perfect. Though I should point out that the spirit's flirtatious nature is not Frank Miller's fault.
Denny Colt was always a bit of a flirt in the source material, teasing and bantering with the femme fatales around him because that came with the job of being a vigilante detective.
If you want to blame someone for it, blame Will Eisner. Or maybe don't blame him and just accept that it's part of the noir genre.
So like I said, even with its flaws, Frank Miller's The Spirit has a lot to like about it if you're willing to just sit back and have fun. Wait, is that Stana Katic? Holy crud, it is!
You know, Stana Katic. She played Detective Kate Beckett in Castle.
Someone was right. You'll like detective in no time.
Thank you, sir.
Boy, they weren't kidding. That has got to be the craziest coincidence to come out of this movie. What was I talking about? Right, fun. Frank Miller's The Spirit is fun, and I dare say its reputation is undeserved.
At a time when all people wanted was dark and depressing, The Spirit came along to remind us that the superhero genre is just as much a means of fun escapism as anything else, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Sure, some people genuinely don't like it, no movie is for everyone, but to count it among the worst is a gross exaggeration. You want the worst, watch Man-Thing. Or just watch my review of it to save you the agony. Criticizing The Spirit for being silly and changing the source material is a bit like criticizing a Weird Al music video for the same. That's the entire point, and if you really don't get that, then the joke is on you.
I think it's high time the public gave this movie another chance, especially now that we're out of the dark, gritty realism phase of superhero movies. Who knows? You might find that it's a little bit better than you remember. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Alright, fine. I just think you're taking this way too seriously, that's all.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.